Tom Murray, quien es el director de la United States Geological Survey Volcano Science Center. Además, administra el Volcano Disaster Assistance Program y 5 de los observatorios vulcanológicos de los Estados Unidos. El Dr. Murray ha estado vinculado al Servicio Geológico de los Estados Unidos de América, donde ha trabajado en diferentes observatorios volcánicos, desarrollando sistemas de adquisición y análisis de datos. Desde el 2001, su trabajo se ha enfocado en instrumentación y tecnología de la información aplicada a sistemas de monitoreo volcánico. El conferencista ofrecerá la siguiente presentación: Challenge to Integrating Geographically Dispersed Data and Expertise During Eruption Responses.
Buenas tardes. First of all, I want to congratulate the Columbian Geological Survey on their 100th anniversary. I recently reestablished my connections down here and my ties with the SGC, and I have met many new faces. Based on these future leaders of the SGC, I have no doubt that it is in good hands going into its next 100 years, and its success in serving the people of Columbia will continue. I'm also honored that I was asked to give this talk today. Thank you. However, I am going to take a bit of a risk today in talking about research collaborations. Though we all agree that collaboration is good, there are still challenges to actually making it work for everyone. For those of you expecting to see erupting volcanoes in this talk, I apologize. For those of you expecting to see some new scientific discoveries, I apologize. But I hope I can prompt some thought on your part as you enter into research collaborations into the future. It is the way the world is moving. My experiences are admittedly very specialized. Volcano crisis response. That is, in science, sometimes you need to test the end limits to see if your ideas are correct. I think volcano crisis response provides that end limit testing in the area of collaboration. And finally, in a preface, most of this is based on experiences and conversation with colleagues around the Pacific Rim, including those from Columbia. This talk in itself is a product of collaboration. Yes. I would like to talk to you today about some of the challenges to research collaboration, especially as it pertains to volcano observatories and crisis response. I offer no slick software packages as solutions because they will likely be outdated within 5 years. I will talk about why volcano crises are unique in the geohazard field, some management structures to facilitate research collaborations, and the main challenges in maintaining good collaborations. But first, when I talk about a crisis response, I mean activities that lead to an eruption, or even activities that look like they are leading to an eruption but do not. A volcano crisis response, a crisis, doesn't have to necessarily involve an eruption. You can have a volcano showing all signs of that it's going to erupt. People will be wanting to move out, land values will be dropping, and then the volcano does nothing. That is also a crisis. So why volcanoes are a special case? Though not a unique characteristic, it is noteworthy that volcano research is inherently multidisciplinary. All these disciplines here, there we go. All these here, probably nobody back in the back row can see that, but going at it. All these disciplines play a part in understanding volcanic processes and assessing the current state of the volcano. Is it moving to an eruption? If so, what are the threats and hazards? Thus, an observatory has a collaborative research environment, even if all the scientists are under the same roof. So, unlike some other observatories, a volcano observatory does include seismology, geodesy, geomapping, petrology. It's almost, you could say, its own little geological survey in its own right. So this is the sort of the classic case in the old observatory model, and this is basically pre-internet, where it was largely a self-contained organization in one building with a single director equivalent. Also, please take note of the products of the observatory. Over here, there is research comes out of the observatory, but that's only part of it, and this will become more important farther in and actually throughout the talk. That an observatory also has responsibilities for hazard assessments, forecasts, and warnings, not just the research. However, do note that the research is fundamental to all these, which is why the observatory needs to be doing the research. So now we start to move into the new model. With the advent of the internet, all of a sudden, with the advent of the internet for easy communication over the entire planet, the ever-increasing bandwidth to move data similarly, the ability to collaborate with almost anyone is now reality. So the observatory research collaboration model has changed. Remember, before it was just everybody under one roof, one boss, one organization. Rather than all in one building, now it can be global. And so you still have the basic observatory. You still need this. But now you also have maybe geophysical networks from some other group coming in. Lightning, it's actually important. Web cameras, radar, 24/7 news cycle, satellite remote sensing. So, a challenge is for all this then is that none of these other groups over here or people have an exact match with the observatory goals. Research products, assessments, forecasts, and warnings. They may have a match with some of them, but not all of them. Even in the formal partnerships among the state, federal, and university groups that make up the Alaska Volcano Observatory, problems still develop because the missions and culture of the university, the state, and the federal parts of the observatory are not identical. Thus, attention to groups outside the core observatory needs special attention. Leadership by the director of the observatory is needed to keep everyone working to the common observatory goals. The other groups will obviously be working for whatever goals their organization has, but it's incumbent upon the director of this observatory to keep everybody focused on the observatory goals. The other observatories can still pursue their own mission goals, but under the observatory, they need to keep focused on the observatory goals. Okay, here's a chart that was put together for emergency managers to talk about how volcano crisis response is different from other hazards they normally face. You will see here is the actual event, what the hazard is. Here's the precursory time, weeks to months, days, and then the duration of the event after it happens, days, weeks to months. So floods, couple days, rainfall models and stuff like that, and it can last days, and if it's a really big flood, maybe into weeks as it's making its way down the river. Hurricane, sort of similar sort of things. Earthquake, of course, kind of starts right at the event. There's no warnings really that come in that way. Wildfire also starts when the lightning strikes and the wildfire starts. And then we have eruption. And it's wildly different. It can know, in fact, when it says weeks to months, on both sides, this can be years to maybe a decade in some cases. Okay, so we contrast that with the volcanoes where the buildup to eruption can last from days to years, and the duration can go for decades. This, of course, greatly complicates the actions taken by emergency managers, the local officials, and the public. The volcano may not return to normal for years, and the public wants to get back with their normal lives. But if this is going on for years, what is normal is going to change. Okay, this slide shows the time lag from the start of the precursory activity to the maximum eruption. Actually, it's somewhat visible in the back there, but I think the main point here I want to emphasize, many catastrophic eruptions have provided little warning. Others may take years to produce the largest magnitude hazardous events, and then some do not erupt. So what we show here is about 40% of the volcanoes erupt with only about a day's notice. But then there's quite a bit. This is 12%, so we add up 12, another 10, so 1, 2, 3, 4. So like 40% the volcanoes are in 1 day to, well, or 10%, 1 to 7. Here, this is 1 to 6 months, or 6 to 12 months. So a year, months to a year, that's 14 and another 6. So like 20% of the volcanoes may take a month to a year between the first precursory signs and its eruption. And maybe this is a lot easier to understand here. Mount St. Helens, there was 2 months of precursory period before the big eruption. Huila here in Colombia, 19 months. Okmok in Alaska, we had 1.5 hours. That was an exciting morning. And then Rabaul in the PNG was almost 10 years before it finally erupted. So this is similar information for the duration. So this is what happens after the eruption, how long activity continues. This, of course, is of immense concern to the public, as you would expect. The public, emergency managers, and other public officials would really prefer to have the hazardous event be over quickly so cleanup and rehabilitation can commence. And that's the case with the other hazards, but not volcanoes. So volcanic eruptions can last for months or even years, though it says here the median duration is about 7 weeks. In contrast, Kilauea in Hawaii has been erupting for over 30 years. So now you'll say, well, Tom, that was really fascinating. But what the heck has that to do with scientific collaboration? Well, the positive result of the longer buildup and the longer duration is that now we have an opportunity with volcanoes to conduct new research and collect more or new data for analysis during the event. That's not the case with the other events. So what is a large headache to the public is actually a net positive to us. During the duration, during the buildup, is a time where new instruments can be put into the ground to collect more and better data. Researchers can adjust their models or analysis as new data comes in. More scientists will focus on the volcano. They suspect that it is building to an eruption. Research collaboration increases markedly during times like this as the volcano builds to an eruption, and then activity increases and decreases at its level until maybe it goes back to sleep. So we actually, during the eruption, can learn a lot. And again, the other ones, you collect the data, it goes into research later on. With a volcano, it goes right into the research collaboration that is the observatory or wherever or whatever it's called. But it goes into the observatory system, and it's being used to better understand the volcano going forward. Again, in sort of contrast, actually, I guess I should have done that. Yes. In contrast, for instance, an earthquake hits. Well, the seismic analyst isn't going to sit there and twiddle the model to get the location. They need the location in probably less than 5 minutes these days is what is expected, location and magnitudes. So all of a sudden, you're not going to do that at that point. You will use the data for later research, but it doesn't help you in the actual event. So because, hello, okay. Because the volcano now gives us this time to do something, observatories will be expected to use that time as appropriate and obtain the appropriate information and expertise that is available. As shown, we might have quite a bit of time to acquire more data from the volcano, months, weeks, maybe years, and also engage more experts for their assistance. And observatories will be expected to do just that, to use all appropriate information and expertise that is available. If our forecasts and warnings are in error or too vague, the public would be appalled to discover that we were not using every possible resource we could. That is, the public will be expecting us to be collaborating with other experts or to gather more data as appropriate and feasible. It's no longer becoming a bit of a choice. Despite the tools available today, collaboration is still not as easy as one would like it to be. Collaborations will need continual attention and nurturing. For instance, many of the possible collaborating groups that we saw earlier will have their own collaboration tools, and they won't all be the same. Thus, they're not going to change how they do business just to work with the observatory. So many times with the observatory having to work with all these disparate groups, we are the ones that will be having to go through and adapt to our collaborators' needs. This will be a challenge for the IT staff, but usually manageable in some fashion. So to summarize the last several slides, with the other hazards, the state of our scientific understanding is what it is during the event. In contrast, volcanoes, it can grow. Thus, we need to take advantage of this opportunity to conduct new research and collect more new data to help us better understand what the volcano is doing and thus make better forecasts to the public. And this, of course, will entail better collaboration. So let us look at some research collaboration models. And we'll start with the simplest. The product is, the one thing to note here is with this group, boy, it really goes, here we go, okay. The product is the research. Since we have our esteemed scientists here, they want to do research. They put, this is my collaborative research soup. So letters, ideas, proofs, equations, lab results, et cetera, go into here and then goes back out to the various scientists. What makes this really work are a couple things. A, usually this is self-selecting, and B, the actual output is research papers. So they don't have any other product that they're interested in. The model is and will probably continue to be the bedrock of scientific work. How our three scientists here begin collaborating could be anything. In school together, worked on a project together, continued working together, or maybe we're just in a basketball league together. In any event, there's no formal structure, just the common interests in the research. So that's the simplest way to go. However, we can complicate it. Let's say instead of just their research, somebody wants a report or a book out of this thing. So we still have to have collaboration going on over here with these people, but now we have this report or a book. So someone has to distill all that has been contributed in the research soup to the desired product. Even if this is just editing individual manuscripts, it is not a trivial task. In some cases, style standards will need to be set before the authors contribute material, deadlines, other such things. In the case of a report, there will always be someone who is responsible to see that the product is delivered. The other one didn't have anything like that. This one is going to have somebody in charge. The process and the collaborators will have to be managed to some level. For a volume, the main task for the editors, from what I usually see, is just getting the contributors to deliver their manuscripts on time, or even close to it, or even 6 months later. There doesn't seem to be as much of a time constraint on these things. So here's all of a sudden, now we have an editor, a committee here, and a reporter, a book, and this is the person in charge of all the research into this, moving the research into the specific product. So, with a couple changes, our slide can start to look like the volcano observatory approach. But there are some fundamental differences, including here. There might be legal responsibilities. Somebody's just producing a volume, there's probably not a legal responsibility. But if we're in an observatory, somebody's going to probably have a legal responsibility to issue the warnings and notifications. There are going to be time constraints. Again, the volcano is not, if the volcano wants to erupt in 1.5 hours, it's going to do it whether you're ready or not. You have to go with what you have. You can't say more work is necessary or I need another month to do it. And then this one's pretty specific to observatories. There's ramifications of going around the head of the observatory. This primarily refers to the press, and I'll get into that later. But that's a huge problem with the observatories. I say huge in as much as it crops up often, not all that often, maybe I would experience maybe half a dozen times a year or so. So the primary challenge is to get outside collaborators to understand the mission and the goal of the observatory. If they are to be active collaborators in the observatory environment, they must play by the observatory rules. And trust is absolutely critical in all of this. None of this really works without the trust. The trust among the collaborators, the trust of the collaborators with the director of the observatory, that is an essential part of it. Without the trust, everything falls apart. Science is the tool that the observatory uses to achieve its goals and to produce its products, but is not necessarily the goal itself. The goal is not a journal manuscript from the observatory, but to be prepared to address a crowd of citizens such as this. And this is taken from a couple years ago when my colleagues in the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory were going down and facing this crowd several times a week as the lava flow was approaching their town. This notion is something that needs reinforcement because for most researchers, publishing is the basis of their careers. But an observatory's mission is to reduce deaths and societal economic disruptions, which can occur even if nothing erupts. The journal article may not be a priority for the observatory, or at least not at that time. Now, this doesn't mean that someone can't publish a journal article on their own. We are not censors. They just have to do it in a way that does not compromise the mission of the observatory. There are some basic restrictions if one wants to collaborate, and I'll discuss some more of that a little later. But the basic thing is if you're going to go publish something, let us know ahead of time so we can prepare for it and not find out when the phone system lights up at 8:30 in the morning in the office because all the media people and emergency managers are calling to find out what the heck is going on based on some report somebody else put. So what does this all mean in reality? This is still pretty abstract. So as a reminder, observatories are research collaborations as they draw on expertise and analysis from groups and colleagues worldwide. The research is the basis for the warnings, the forecasts, and everything else. So here we have replaced our esteemed researchers with the various data and disciplines that make up the observatory. So we have academic colleagues, international colleagues, other observatories, meteorological weather offices, other government scientists, etc. Now, right now, I've just left it research products. With the sole output of research products, this all works very simply like many other collaborative efforts that happen. This is collaboration because it is essential that information is being exchanged. This is collaboration. Information is being exchanged in the soup of the Volcano Observatory from all these places. They put information in, they get information back out on it. It is essential that it works that way, that information is being exchanged both into the observatory and back out of the observatory. because that's how these people need to know what's going on in here, and they need to know what the other people are doing in order to do their job properly. Okay, so this is basically the same thing, but I'm going to complicate it. I've done that by adding assessments, forecasts, and warnings. These aren't research products. These are not things that necessarily our academic colleagues are going to be familiar with. Again, these products, the forecasts and the warnings, might be designated by statute that the observatory must provide. They could determine who or whether tens of thousands of people are evacuated or remain. Thus, this gets outside the normal research environment. Even peer review will get suspended in here because the observatory must use what it can in its efforts, even if the analysis is still preliminary. Early on in my career in Long Valley in California, there was a lot of earthquakes, so there was a lot of concern, public concern. We had a very esteemed colleague who went out and did geodetic measurements all the time, but he would not come to our nightly meetings because he would not release any data until it was perfect. So we didn't care to plus and minus a couple centimeters what the data said. He could have told this almost by just looking at the data by eyeball, but he wanted to get it down into the millimeter level or whatever at that time. And so he just wouldn't participate in it. And this caused some consternation, and eventually just everybody gave up on him because he was actually a very high, held in high esteem, so we couldn't fire him or anything like that. But it did complicate things because he wanted it, he was putting it into the levels of research products, and we needed it the level down here. And as I said, we're not at the time to conduct normal peer review procedures. Okay, so we're moving on with our little diagram. There always seems to be a single person who is ultimately responsible in the observatory or in the system, depending on which country. In the US, it is the scientist in charge of the observatory. In other countries, it may move up the organization to another level for the final say. But there's usually one person who has the final responsibility and authority. The easiest way to identify this person is that at any meeting talking about what's going on at the volcano, everybody will go very quiet, and all eyes will then go to one person. That's the person that is obviously having to make the decision, and then that's likely the director or whatever scientist in charge. That person may make the decision in his or her office alone, through a subset of senior staff, by some sort of consensus, maybe even a show of hands. But that person is responsible and accountable for that decision. One person jokingly suggested that all the staff at an observatory should have 4 coffee cups. They'd be colored green, yellow, orange, and red to choose from. The observatory director would be able then to immediately see the feeling of the entire staff by just wandering around the office and seeing the color of the coffee cups that people had and were using that day. I really liked it, but could not bring myself to do it. I did not have the courage to do it, and plus I didn't really want to manage that many coffee cups. So, for our example, I've chosen this young student to represent the head of the observatory, and I will simply refer to him as the director. He has a very difficult task. He is responsible and accountable for reducing all the research and monitoring information into effective monitorings and forecasts. In some cases, this is like taking an hour's worth of scientific discussion and a week's worth of research analysis from all the collaborators and condensing it into a single Twitter message. The volcano will erupt in the next 24 to 72 hours. So that is a lot of responsibility on our director's shoulders, but I have confidence in him. and I will continue to call him the observatory director. So let's move him up there. So before we had our book editors and stuff, now we have him. He's the one responsible for all of this. So to sum up this section, this means that when you join the observatory collaboration, I think, do we go one more? Yes. He's remounted and accountable. Actually, I'll emphasize that again. Accountable is a big word here. You can be accountable for a book volume or a commission report, and if it's if it goes for an extra 3 or 4 months, usually nobody gets on your case. But if you're this gentleman, there are dire consequences if you're not doing things properly, timely, and everything else. That's where the accountability really comes in. Excuse me for a moment here. Somehow I got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Actually, to back up here, sorry here. In the next decade, wrong. In the next decade, this increasingly is going to be our model. We have our core observatory as we did back in the very beginning, but now we have this sort of extended family of collaborators. And some of these will be formal or informal. But as we move forward, this is going to be the model for the volcano observatories. A core observatory drawing on expertise and data from outside relationships. So what this means is that when you join the observatory collaboration, you're also agreeing to abide by certain rules of behavior and accepting that it is the observatory director who issues warnings and forecasts to the public. Again, it's sometimes hard for some of our research colleagues to sort of understand the chain of command that comes about in such an organization. And of course, when everyone behaves properly, the observatory becomes a rich environment, collaboration with direct, tangible societal benefits. One of the best places you could ever work. But that's like everything, when people do not always behave properly. So the problems can develop and do, and then I will now outline the 3 most common problems in our collaborations in the research collaborations in the observatory. The biggest one is going directly to the media rather than through the director or observatory channels. Publishing data or ideas of another without permission. This may crop up in any of your collaborations. Somebody is there and looking at this soup of information, and all of a sudden, boom, out comes a paper that has your ideas or some of your data in it. And then we also have a director who is not performing well. That influences how all the collaborators feel and everything. I've only encountered this once, and luckily it was a situation where the person was quite introverted and shy, so we were able just to sort of bypass him, and he was content to let it happen. So, what happens when these problems occur? Well, here we go, going directly to the media and challenging the consensus observatory message. The real issue here is the consensus observatory message. You could go talk to the media, but you got to stay on message. The last thing you want in a crisis is about 20 different forecasts or messages getting out in the press, because then the press is going to go through and exploit that by finding out, how come so-and-so said this? What do you think of so-and-so and that? You have to be consistent in this thing. Discussion happens here and in here, but once it gets out on this side, everybody has to agree that they'll abide by that. So, we have Dr. X down here. He went directly to the media. He said, I don't think this volcano is going to erupt. Everybody should go home. The USGS doesn't know what the heck it's talking about. That happened, I believe, on May 17th or 16th, 1980, about Mount St. Helens, which then had its big eruption on May 18th. You had a, quote, world-renowned geologist, volcanologist show up and do that. He was not a popular guy. So what happens? Well, because this is the media, this is what happens. I don't know if you can see it. That's a lava fountain. The director is going to be very upset because he probably had, who knows what he had planned today. What he's going to have to do now is spend the next day or 2 or 3 talking to the media, doing all the damage control, and getting everybody back on message again. So he's really upset about this. I've been in this role. So, what does he do? Well, he'll go down and talk to him. Sometimes this is just an honest mistake. Sometimes it's a misquote. Sometimes it's the person saying he was misquoted when he was not, but you kind of have to play along. If it gets out of hand, then you just cut him off. Person's not part of the collaboration. He's no longer welcome. The observatory can do something else. So that's how that typically works when going to the press. Using data and ideas from others without permission or attribution. This is the thing where there's a lot of data in here. There's a lot of ideas floating around in here. All of a sudden, what happens if Dr. X comes in here and goes, oh, well, that's interesting data. I'll go publish that. And furthermore, I won't even tell the person who collected the data and inserted the data in here that I'm going to do it. It happens. So, all of a sudden, we find out about that when the journal article comes out. Then what happens? The director, he's not all that upset. He's perturbed because he's going to have to do something, but this is not going to occupy him from 2 to 3 days. However, these people now are really upset. So what might happen in this case is director goes down, talks to Dr. X, tries to figure out, does the guy understand or whatever. But if worst case, well, I guess, so what one action is, cut the guy off again. The real problem with this one is, I mentioned trust much earlier. The real problem with this is, this destroys trust for everybody. And so you might end up one or more other groups saying, I'm not going to participate anymore. So going to the press is something, yes, he's not as perturbed about it because it's not going to occupy his day, but the damage it can do to this system and the collaboration with the others is much, much worse. We also have then the observatory director who's not performing well. And the reason that's a problem is that that affects morale and people's willingness to participate over here in the collaboration. If depending on what sort of characteristics this person has, this could drive these people away also. Because remember, some of this stuff might be by formal agreement, but a lot of it is still just driven by individual project by investigators. So, yeah, it may be something with other federal, well, let's just say another observatory. Well, it might be just because that person has worked up in Alaska, wants to continue if this was Alaska, but that person may just drop out. So these are some of the things that come up. Poor judgment, not open to new or different ideas, personal grudges, ridiculing scientists publicly. These things all can come into play, and it affects the whole organization. You can also surround himself with like-minded thinkers. So if you find our center director here, and this is his staff, that's a warning sign also. That he has surrounded himself by yes men who are just going to continue to tell him he's doing a great job. Something like this is actually pretty rare in a volcano observatory, getting back to because it's inherently multidisciplinary. So it's difficult, if the guy is any good, he will usually be surrounding himself with a seismologist, a geochemist, hazards expert, remote sensor. So inherently you can build up a staff of people that are good at being skeptical about other people's data, explaining their data, et cetera, et cetera. So this is actually pretty difficult to come about. And of course, the other difficulty here is the previous cases, you just tell them they can't log in anymore or leave. But in this case, this is a human resources issue, and removal might be necessary. Firing, it gets very messy. So those are some of the problems. We'll go back a little bit. The one about the going to the media directly. I been in 2 instances with direct knowledge of that in my foreign work. And in one country, the offending scientist, it's a North American, by the way, was told in no uncertain terms he was to leave the building, never come back, and he would probably not be able to cooperate with anybody in Mexico again. I wasn't going to name the country. Anyways. But yeah, because he'd gone to the press, he was just making a huge mess of what was already a difficult situation because Popocatépetl was just becoming alive. In the other instance, the person was creating a very big local mess. He was told to get on the first flight out in the morning, or they would not guarantee that he would fly out of there ever. Meaning this was a place, too, where that was not an idle threat, that his physical safety was in jeopardy if he didn't go out right away. I unfortunately never have those options. I wish I did at times. But those are the types of things that occur that really damage the collaborations, that are the heart and soul of the operations. And the collaboration is really a lot of the fun of the operation, of sitting in the room with a lot of people discussing what's going on, trying to figure out and analyze the data. So I'm concluding now. Main thing here, once again, I'll probably get this figured out by the end here. It's very easy to think, well, we're all scientists, we all get together, get along, everything's fine. Well, don't assume that even small, diverse collaborations will work organically. By and large, the systems, let me stop there, organically. And this especially comes into play if there are differing goals. If everybody just wants to get out journal papers, that works fine. But if there's this goal of getting out warnings and notifications, then things can be much more difficult. And there might be other examples in other fields. This is the one I know. But anyway, so you have to make, and a lot of this is for the center director, but as a researcher, you should probably know this too when you get involved. You have to understand what the goals of the collaboration are. In most, not all instances, but in a place like an observatory, basic rules should be written down, researchers understand them, and are respective to the group's culture. And this would mean that anytime a new researcher comes in, somebody should sit down and say, okay, here are the rules, don't go to the press, don't do this, that's that, the bathroom's down the corner to the left. You're all done. And part of that is having the researchers understand the ramifications of poor behavior. And that again gets to the things. This stuff with the press and making problems there, there's real world ramifications to that. Lives could be at risk by this behavior. And most of the people, when you do explain it to them that way, they're very receptive. A lot of times, and why I'm saying this here, is that people just don't even know that, or they would know it once they think about it, but they don't think about it. And then and then researchers exhibiting the poor behavior have to be disciplined. It's just like with a child or anybody else. If you let them get away with it, they'll continue to do it. So you do maybe have to make examples of people now and then. So with that, muchas gracias.
¿Tenemos espacio para preguntas? Thank you very much, Tom Murray, de Colombia.
I do. Sorry. Shall I? Okay. So yeah, I wonder. You talked about the task of the IT people regarding to the unification of, data, software, and procedures. So, in certain sense, as much as the data increase, there is the need of to make a standard, the procedures, the steps, and the software indeed. So to process data and indeed build up this also type of trust in what the results could be. And so far in many fields, this is where the chain breaks. So I wonder, how does it work in volcanology in that regard?
I'm not sure I heard all of that, but it's with the collaborations. But basically, where was the trust? You mentioned trust in there?
I mentioned that trust depends also in getting to know and trust. The data processing, for example, there are big uncertainties in this type of things. Of course, the steps processing that different observatories are adopting data, so unifying these type of things is very important right now, where the data grows exponentially nowadays. So I wonder, how does it work in volcanology, since you mentioned the IT job in this?
I kind of use that more as an example, simply because what I was trying to talk about was the fact you're not going to be able to convince a lot of the other groups to change their standards to meet your standards. So in the past, if you acknowledge that, then you do have to start making the changes, or you have to adapt them to whatever you have in your observatory. I guess I'm still a little shaky. Maybe we can talk off after this on that, okay? Sorry.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Tom, thank you very much. The Columbia Geological Survey gives you the symbol of the symposium in recognition for your conference. Muchas gracias.
Good.